Hello, everyone. Welcome to Address Seminar Series. And today we're hosting two early career researchers that I closely follow and whose work I really admire a lot from Hong Kong. So this seminar, just to give you a little bit of information, and I'll provide further info about our speakers. So this seminar is being live streamed for postgraduate students, staff, and other interested people who can ask questions at the end of the presentation or via the chat box. But given that we are a good number of people here, we may just consider just unmuting ourselves at the end of the presentation and asking questions directly to our speakers. So the session will be recorded and recording will be available on the department website. So today, as I said, we have two speakers and they will be talking about the power dynamics and inequalities on South-South and South-North collaborations. Our first speaker is Yusuf Iqbal Oldac. He's an assistant professor based at Hong Kong Lingnan University, and he is also a core center fellow at the Institute of Policy Studies of the same institution, and his research focuses on international and comparative higher education in the context of globalization. And then we have Lili Yang, who is an assistant professor at the Faculty of Education, the University of Hong Kong. She has strong interest in cross-cultural and especially Eastern-Western comparison in higher education, and her research interests include higher education, comparative and international education, global science, education, political philosophy, and you may already have come across her new book, which is called Higher Education, State and Society, Comparing Chinese and Anglo-American Approaches, which has been published from Bloomsbury, and it came out only this year.
Okay, so thank you very much. These technical issues happen in almost, all the presentations like these, online seminars. It is all good. And she already introduced, almost everything anyway. We are very grateful to be here. I know Melis for a while now. I follow her research, very interesting as well. And very happy to meet the Lancaster team. I have been working with, a few other colleagues there as well. Very lovely department you have there. And we're honored to be invited here, actually. So let me share my screen. I hope you won't have any issues. So can everyone see my slides in full screen?
Yes.
Yes, that's fine. Yes.
Okay. I guess the voice, everything is fine. If anything goes wrong, just let me know either in the chat or you can talk. So today we will be talking about dynamics of international research collaboration in higher education. I have been working on this topic with Lili Yang, a very good friend. We've been working on this since our Hong Kong times, let's say. We came around the same time to the Hong Kong. And before that, we were in Oxford together. So in this international research collaborations, we specifically focus on the collaborations happening outside, the global north or global west, let's say. So we focus on South-South and South-North collaborations in this presentation. But I acknowledge the caveat that I think this South-North, these distinctions are becoming to be, tough to make. It's not that easy. So let me check my time so that to make sure I finish on time, basically. Okay, so, okay, good. Okay, so we will be presenting some part of a bigger project, basically. So there's an overarching comparative project ongoing. Our presentation will report, this project has 3 contexts in total. Maybe I should say that first. In alphabetical order, China, Ghana, and Turkey. So in this presentation specifically, we will report from the 2 cases, Turkey and China. The project is ongoing. We are currently working on the other paper arising from Ghanaian context. I think there are interesting things there. And an integrative comparative paper is on our to-do list right now, and more to come. We recently got a new grant to research Southeast Asia and what's going on there. And I think there is a lot going on there. So more to come, let's say, and happy to continue to be in touch about these developments. So we have organized this presentation based on the logical flow of the findings, basically. So I will go first and present the findings from the Turkish case, and Lili will continue afterwards and present the findings from the Chinese case. So we also wanted to acknowledge our team. So Melis introduced us nicely and said we're young, early career scholars, right? Well, we have a team, we have earlier career scholars in our team. So on the right, you see it's us, the co-PIs, Lili and I, and on the left, Jacob on top left, he has been working with us and very helpful in the Ghanaian context. And Maya Secheng Lee, bottom left, is also working on this, and we will have further papers with her as well. So we're grateful to our team. Let's start with the first paper. I must admit, this paper published way quicker than I was expecting. I submitted it, I think, I don't know, maybe it's already written in this screenshot. But anyways, it is published now. It is in this journal, as you can see, Higher Education. The topic is West is must, the rest is optional. Epistemic injustice and positional good in international research collaboration. So let us start by introducing the topic, the international research collaborations. What are they, right? A dominant trend in contemporary higher education and across science systems in the 21st century is the unprecedented increase in international research collaborations. IRC, so IRC is the shortened form for international research collaborations. I may use it a lot because I just got used to that shortened form, basically. So IRC happens when researchers across borders cooperate to conduct and publish research publications. Research on IRC has been increasingly the focus of bibliometric and scientometric studies that use the metadata of publications. However, the importance of IRC goes beyond bibliometrics and studies focusing on scientific efficiency. Despite its increasing importance, IRC research is relatively recent for higher education studies. There are many studies now coming on this topic, but it hasn't been there for a long time, let's say. So why is international research collaboration important? Many consider IRC an indicator of high quality research. This is just discussed in the literature already. So IRC is an effective way for developing countries to acquire scientific knowledge and technology, some discuss. Others say IRC is significant for researchers considering the shifting reward and incentive systems, which are increasingly becoming output-oriented. And then another point, IRC can earn more citations, they say, because more people are aware of it, I guess. You contribute to talk to them, right? And IRC allows researchers to share their experiences, data, and methods, which may lead to novel and important insights into established procedures. So not everything is about additional citations, but there's actually meaningful value into this and many other things going on. But there's this situation, global inequalities and hegemony in IRC. That's something we have been working on. So power balances in global North-South research collaborations have been connected to an uneven division of labor. Global South researchers have long complained that they are treated as nothing more than glorified field workers and local brokers. Researchers from Europe and North America make up disproportionate share of editorial boards for top academic publications. This is there, I mean. And statistics indicate that top journals view research produced by global South partnerships as more insular. So work is less prominently featured in top journals than that produced by global North-South partnerships, let's say, or North-North partnerships. Research from the global North is often seen as more valuable than the global South. This is accepted in many, journals by editors as well, and they're taking measures about this. But still, the inequality is there, and it's causing some issues in international research collaborations, which we will come to in our findings. So in this first paper, we have this theoretical framework. It's actually a bit emergent. We didn't have this as a prior before analyzing the data. But when I checked, when we started analyzing the data, we thought there's this epistemic injustice and positional good are very visible in these findings, basically. Let me discuss what they are. Epistemic injustice in this study refers to differential values ascribed to research conducted in different parts of the world, creating hegemonic inequalities in global research. This is the capacity to know and produce knowledge is perceived to be unequal through prejudicial stereotypes and social power. Some societies are perceived as less credible in their knowledge and knowledge creation and knowledge sharing, let's say. And positional good is something else. It's not necessarily related to knowledge creation, but it seems to be coming up and it seems to be working well with epistemic injustice. Positional competition works together with the concept, the epistemic injustice, as I said. Hirsch, I hope I'm pronouncing this person's name well. He has done a lot of work, and important work on this. He views positional goods to be scarce commodities in socially imposed or absolute numbers. For example, good seats in theater. It's an interesting example, but these goods are hard to obtain and scarce. A similar situation takes place in IRC, we argue. Differential values ascribed for knowing and producing knowledge lead to a positional competition to work with those who have higher socially constructed epistemic values. So these socially constructed mechanisms create a hegemonic inequality in IRC between the global North, West, and researchers and institutions in the other parts of the world. So the first case that I'm reporting is the Turkish case. Turkey is uniquely positioned at the borderline of global Northwest and global Southeast dichotomies, right? But it is usually not categorized as the global North or West. But these are blurry, I would say. But still, this has the point here. Another critical point about Turkey's IRC is its geographical position at the crossroads of Europe and Asia. Given that Turkey is closely located next to the European Union and is part of the EU's Horizon research schemes, it is highly connected to Europe-based researchers and funds. However, Turkey's geopolitical position also puts the country in a position to collaborate and connect with other research systems, such as those in Asia. The above situation makes Turkey an important place for researching the impact of hegemony and inequalities in IRC because it allows the power dynamics of competing geopolitical actors more visible. So purpose of this paper specifically, this study investigates how hegemony resulting from epistemic injustice and positional competition impacts IRC in the unequal global research system using data from Turkish higher education. So our research question is related to that, basically, what are the dynamics of epistemic injustice, positional good, and hegemony in IRC as reflected in the views and practices of multiple actors? By multiple actors, we mean researchers, institutional managers, and national policymakers. These are all research-related people. And yes, in Turkish higher education system. In terms of methods, we employ a similar methodology with this one and the following case. We follow qualitative case study approach to investigate an intensive holistic description and analysis of IRC in Turkey. So we chose a comprehensive and research-oriented university in Turkey, and we conducted in-depth qualitative data on their international research collaborations and related matters. So this university holds a significant position in Turkish higher education. It's among the highest ranked institutions, and it represents one of the highest levels of internationalization in Turkey. It also provides a well-rounded representation of numerous research fields. So the point is, this university does do international research collaborations. Maybe not all universities do that. So this selection was important for us in that sense. We used semi-structured interviews, approximately 1 hour each. We tried to make sure all OECD research areas are represented. And there's one sentence seems to be not visible, but I guess we also, maybe I was talking about the gender representation. We try to make sure there are female and male professors and they're represented in a balanced manner. Here's a summary of the participants. You can have a look. The university didn't have medicine, so in the end, we don't have participants from that research area, but the others are mostly covered. So we want to discuss the findings in 3 themes. The first one is IRC with the West is a must, the rest is optional. Well, it's the individual scale basically. And this is an in vivo quote. I didn't, coin this. The West is must. It's just was an interesting sentence coming out from the one interviews. And then we will go to supranational scale, which I will discuss funding in that one, because funding can be international and can have strong implications. And lastly, we will look at the institutional scale. Okay, so let's have a look, and we will give some concrete examples, and it will maybe make better. So we start with the individual scale. So the findings of our study indicated a higher value attached to IRC with researchers and institutions based in global Northwest. The participants highlighted that their priority would be collaborating with Euro-American universities as endorsed by their institutions. IRC with researchers and institutions in other parts of the world is okay, but they are quote unquote optional. That's the, I think, main overarching understanding under this theme. For example, let me read this quotation for us. This is from one of the participants, researchers. So there are people from many different countries whom you would want to collaborate with. However, this is something that our institution supports. It is better to do a doctorate in a good European or American university, and collaborations should be the same. The others are optional. So it's just one person's commentary. And another one, positional competition is one aspect of this. It's strongly coming out. So let me read this. Here you see another quotation from another researcher. He says, people see these collaborations as a way to position themselves in their careers. For example, let's say if you collaborate with Indonesia, you will have a budget of 200 liras. Lira is the Turkish currency, right? So for this collaboration, and if you collaborate with Germany, you will have a budget of 50 lira. If you ask which one they would prefer, I am 100% sure many people would say they choose the lower budget and collaborate with Germans, which was a bit, almost provocative. But this is just exactly what the participant says, and later on in the interview, he says, because collaborations with those in the, global North or West may bring up about other benefits, right? So they would be okay with 1/4 of the budget and just go with it. So let's continue with this theme. Western education as a positional good. It was interesting to see this. I'm sure I'm not the first one saying this, but it's coming up in international research collaborations as well. So let me read this quotation for us. The prestige and recognizability of the university where a researcher graduated from are important. So when they say they graduate from there, blah, blah, it has an impact. Another one, IRC with the global South and East, let's say, are less known and trusted. So this person, it's an institutional research manager and himself is a researcher too. He says, sometimes it feels like it's not a real thing. It feels like a Nigerian prince's letter. So this is, sorry about these, but it's coming from the interview. He refers to those spam emails, in the emails they have, some weird titles they have, right? So he's referring to those. So some prince's letter or something, because there's no one with that experience. Now, if I'm going to spend a year or two on this, I'm worried about how the money will come. Will that publication help me in my academic promotion? Promotion matters keep coming up again and again, which are, I think, telling, and we will have some, I think, recommendations about that later on. So let's move to theme 2. Let me check if I have time. I should be fine, I guess. So funding shapes IRC, the supranational scale. So we're specifically looking at international funding here. So for example, one thing that came up is funding shaping who to collaborate. Let's read this together. Some funders, such as the EU, obliges researchers from different countries to be involved. If you're going to propose a project, you need to have researchers from certain countries. For example, there used to be an implicit requirement for an English university in the team because the English had a very strong lobby in Brussels. Now the same applies to the Dutch and Germans. So remember, this is Turkish context. So they are right next to Europe and they are parts of EU horizon. So Turkey also contributes to it. So these findings may not come in other places, but I think the general dynamics may still be there. So funding shaping the research agenda. This is another topic related to this theme that came up. For example, let's read this. There was such a good funding in the UK for the broad theme of corpus linguistics. but certain subtopics of it were required. I observed that even people who don't normally work on that variety said, why not? And wanted to join the project. So basically, people who are working on slightly different or, maybe very different, I don't know, topics, they see a funding and they're like, okay, let's work on this. Which is, this is not to say these are very bad negative things, but these are what's happening, and it's best to acknowledge the power imbalances they create. Funding and geopolitics is another thing. So this person, national policymaker in Turkey, national policymakers had very, to the point, they were very opinionated about these things. They were talking again and again. So this person said, looking at this within the framework of international relations, no one gives funds to anyone for no reason. In this context, Turkey is making efforts to reduce its dependence on foreign countries in the medical materials, medical devices, and pharmaceutical industry. So there's this international relations and dependency arguments coming in with the national policymakers. So this is the last theme, institutional capital for positional competition in IRC. So institutional capital means, we, as a part of the case study, we chose a university that is collaborating internationally a lot, because there's also this chance if you choose a local university, they may not have much experience, and we may not get a lot of, good quality data, right? So rather than ignoring that, we added that as a variable. I mean, variable is a quantitative way of telling, of course, but I mean, we incorporated it in our findings. So this university has institutional capital, and institutions, and to some aspects, nations as well, as we discussed, can impact which international funding should be sought and which are less important. So for example, here, this was one of the researchers, success in EU projects is very important for us and for TÜBİTAK, which is the national funding body of Turkey, because the country is making an investment towards that direction and waiting for a return. They're waiting for a success story immediately because they will also be seen successful. So maybe these places are preferred from that perspective. And then the situation is not necessarily negative, as I have been saying, but the power dynamics, deciding which funding is worth supporting and which funding is maybe a bit sidelined, I think they should be acknowledged. And they were also talking about, their previous experience directing them to go for EU projects, right? Because we know, let me read it for us. This is the second quotation here. Because we know how it works better now, applying to EU projects seems a bit easier to us. The university has experience with it, thanks to the project office. For example, when an agreement is made with China or Africa, how will that process work? Therefore, we generally prefer to apply to places where the choices are known and the system is optimized according to them. So here, we're not saying, like, a lot of participants also said, for example, they graduated from US universities, but still nation and institutional level, the promotions, etc., were designed according to EU fundings, right? So these are contextual matters that we need to include, we need to discuss. Anyways, coming to discussions, one finding that clearly emerged is the strong value attached to collaborating with global Northern or Western scholars or institutions, which could be explained in several ways. One is that IRC with the West seems to procure a higher epistemic value. Epistemic injustice towards research conducted in different parts of the world is not a new discussion in the literature, but the existing literature mostly focuses on the knowledge produced. By contrast, in this study, the findings indicate that the researchers may already be thinking about the epistemic value of their work before publication, and when they're seeking for, collaboration networks, establishing them. Another explanation, building on the previous, is that IRC with the West or North, let's say, is perceived to bring a positional advantage. Positional competition occurs if a value is scarce and in an absolute or socially imposed sense. Our findings indicated that when viewed from outside the global North or West, IRC with scholars in the West or North, especially if they're in a prestigious institution, is a positional good and harder to achieve, because the other one, they have a hard time trusting it. You see some prince's email, they think, but it may be a good funding opportunity. Moreover, our analysis confirmed that international research funding shapes who to collaborate with and what is researched. obtaining international research funding is so competitive that researchers need to align themselves with funder requirements to be able to get their funding. Another thing I need to mention is geographical proximity arguments. This is a discussed phenomenon in the literature, especially those bibliometrics, scientific efficiency studies. They say if two countries are closer, they tend to collaborate more as well because they just, know each other more. Maybe they visit each other more. These develop relations. But aside from that, there's this unequal dynamics going on. And, we will discuss this later on in the conclusions part as well. So I'll hand over to Lili, my colleague, and we will conclude together at the end for both studies.
Thank you, Yusuf. And let me share our second paper from the Chinese case, which is at the stage of revised and resubmitted in Studies in Higher Education. We received good and positive comments from reviewers, and we hope the paper could come out soon and we can share it. Well, from Yusuf's sharing, we see that the global field of research is characterized with inequalities, power imbalance, and competition for positional goods. However, the question is, does this tell the entire story, the whole story? Well, a tentative answer is not, as we have seen that seeing how the field of the global research system, how dynamic it is, how it is pluralizing and multipolarizing. And indeed, in studying global research inequalities, many studies have focused on the shaping and reshaping power of the center peripheral global research system and global inequalities. There is a less attention to how non-central systems seek to challenge the hierarchy and enhance their research capacity. So we would like to zoom in a bit to focus on individual researchers and ask two research questions here. How do researchers as active agents navigate the global field of research through IRC, and what structural factors condition their navigation? And you may see that quite different from the Turkish story that demonstrate global inequalities, power imbalances. The story from the Chinese case highlights the reflexivity and agency of researchers regarding the existing inequalities and so on. Next slide, please. Well, we would like to use the agency structure lens to guide our research as a conceptual lens. Well, as Archer argues, people are not puppies of structures because they have their own emergent properties. And Margins and Xu also note that non-Anglo-American systems and persons have much greater agency than bibliometric collection acknowledge. And these all call for exploration on researchers' agency. Agency is usually used in conjunction with structure in social theories, and there exists varying theorization of the agency structure complex. While these varied approaches empower agency or the structure at different levels, they all accept that agency is not shaped by the structure in its entirety. And this is the same in the global research space. Agents are never entirely shaped by the structure, even though the structure does condition agents, as Yusuf has shared. Specifically, individual researchers encounter structural factors that constrain or enable their actions, but they can perceive, navigate, and utilize these factors to realize their objectives through inner conversations and external activities. And this will include a process of exercising conscious reflective agency in their inner self, including critical self-monitoring, self-evaluation, self-criticism, and self-regulation. And researchers' exercise of agency in their everyday research could cover many aspects, including the selection of research topics, seeking collaborators, making international co-authored publications, applying to research fund, and so on. And the global research space is open for their agentic actions, which in turn will influence the space. However, even though that researchers' agency is gaining increasing recognition and attention in research, it still remains unclear how the agency structure plays out among researchers in the global research space. So from this lens, we would like to take China as an example to explore how Chinese researchers exercise agency in interaction with the structural factors in the global research collaboration. Next slide, please. Well, today, China is often regarded as a global research powerhouse for the quantity and the quality of its research outputs and the volume of its research and development input. Apologies that we seem to forgot to update this slide, including more information about the Chinese context, but no worries, I will introduce them verbally. Well, in 2016, China became the largest country producer of Chinese research outputs, surpassing the United States. And in 2015, the citation rate of Scopus publications by China-based researchers reached the world's average. In certain disciplines, especially science, technology, engineering, and mathematics, China is now among the most highly cited countries in the world. It also has the second largest R&D expenditure, only after the US. However, there would be a completely different picture just looking back for a few decades, suggesting that China is a traditionally non-central system. Well, here we highlight traditionally non-central because we would like to say that China's research system developed only recently. It's not positioned centrally in the global research connectivity, although this is changing, and it's not yet playing a central role in the role and agenda setting in the global research space, which is the most important thing. And China had limited research capacity in the mid-1970s, which when it started to rebuild its higher education and research system. It was from the 1990s that China's research took off, and in its pursuit of research capacity enhancement, IRC has been a very important strategy. So we selected an elite Chinese university as a case with a similar methodological approach as Yusuf just mentioned, and collected institutional and governmental documents and in-depth interview data from the university's individual researchers, administrators, and national government officials working on international collaboration in higher education. Well, next, I would like to report some more findings following the lens of the agency structure complex, and let's look at how researchers exercise their agency in IRC and what structural factors condition their exercise of agency. Let's look at their agency first. We identified two types of agency in their IRC. One is agency as reflective response to structural factors, and second, agency as reflectivity in seeking collaborators and collaboration. Next slide, please. Well, agency as reflective response to structural factors reflects that in interacting with the structural conditioning, the participants develop their own perceptions towards structural factors. Some were perceived as enablers, and some as constraints of IRC. So on the one hand, they demonstrated reflectivity and capacity for utilizing the enablements to pursue their own objectives. For example, to take use of the global research system by actively participating in international conferences, establishing connections with international journals, to work with international collaborators to apply to the existing research fund for international research collaboration, to favorably respond to governmental and institutional incentives for international collaboration, and to actively maintain and expand their existing international research networks. Next slide, please. Here are two quotes from our participants, which are telling. One is one of our researchers share that I think the incentive policies will absolutely influence how people work. I know that some of my colleagues are actively applying for internationally joint funding schemes, which motivates them to work with collaborators in those specific countries. There was another participant noted that I feel that our university is highly positive about international research collaboration. We could do a lot of things in this area if we actively seek for that. These two quotes were sharing that, alluding to the fact that these researchers are highly reflective in terms of what is the environment, and they are good at navigating the available resources and support to realize their own objectives. Next slide, please. Well, on the other hand, there were also constraints in terms of the structural factors. Regarding these constraints, the participants have demonstrated more diverse responses. For example, for possible political sanctions caused by geopolitical tensions, they might stop the collaboration and look for other collaborators. For canceling of certain joint research fund, they might look for other joint funds to collaborate with colleagues from other countries or turn to domestic collaborations. For constraints that were easy to be overcome, such as travel restrictions and mailing delays, they might continue their previous collaboration and make no change. For the issues related to intellectual properties sharing, participants highlighted mutual trust with collaborators to avoid possible disputes. Next slide, please. Well, there are two quotes that I think are helpful for us to see what they were seeing. So one participant shared that I think what we do really depends on how the institution evaluates us, again, highlighting the importance of the structural factor and also their reflectivity about regarding the structure factor. For example, when I was working at the School of Management, international publications were very much emphasized and sought after. Now, the sociology department focuses more on domestic Chinese publications. So I'm no longer that passionate about international collaboration and publication. Well, another institutional administrator who is also a researcher mentioned that my observation is that most of the international collaboration is not funded by projects. Even there is no financial support, it's still possible to have international collaboration. That is to have good collaboration first and produce good collaborative outputs. When there are opportunities, then it's time to seek financial support. So this quote is reflecting that they are not always constrained by the external structural factors because they know what their objectives are and then actively pursue that regardless of what kind of support they have. They highlight them to do the work first and then look for other support afterwards. And there were also other quotes that I didn't put it here, but I can recall one quote from I think it's from the national government official and also from the institutional administrator highlighting that now we need to look for new friends because of those geopolitical tensions. Reflecting the agency of not only the individual researchers, but also the institution and also at the national government. Next slide, please. Well, in addition to the response to the structural enablements and constraints discussed earlier, they also demonstrate the second type of agency, which is the agency as a reflectivity in seeking collaborators and collaboration. So they are highlighting. So we found that from their data that we found that there is agencies evidently manifested in their looking for collaborators that could best support their goals and for the best possible ways to collaborate. Well, regarding whom they hope to collaborate with, they highlighted common research interests, collaborators' research strengths, expertise, working habits, language skills, cultural backgrounds. These were major considerations. And most participants shared that they hope to collaborate with researchers from whom they could learn. And these potential collaborators were usually more senior than themselves and or having certain research skills that they did not have. Next slide, please. There are two quotes here that I'd like to share. One is that when we do research about mathematics, because my programming skills are insufficient, just like labor divisions, I need to collaborate with people who can complement those good at programming. Another researcher mentioned that one purpose of collaboration is to learn from others, to learn from someone who has really good research ethics and qualities and or does cutting edge research. So you can see that this is a bit different from the Turkish case, that they are less highlighting what funding is available and what are required or expected from the institution, even though these are very important, but they are also highlighting that they hope to pursue their own objectives, which of course is also reflected in demonstrated in the Turkish case. Next slide, please. Well, regarding how participants collaborated with their international collaborators, there are some interesting findings, particularly salient disciplinary differences that we would like to underline here. Well, for participants in humanities and social sciences, they tended to work on data collection and analysis, whereas their international collaborators focused more on ideas and conceptualization. There were multiple reasons for this, they mentioned, including the familiarity with the global English literature, language skills, and capacity for conceptualization. And these shared reasons also reflect the global inequalities in the humanities social sciences knowledge production. Well, in contrast, for participants in STEM areas, their division of labor mainly considers their research strengths and who initiated and led the research. Next slide, please. For example, we see one participant in humanities and social sciences mentioned that, well, my international collaborators may be more familiar with the areas in the global English literature. When you work with English native speakers, they are often better with conceptualization, so your work may focus more on data collection and analysis. And this is very common in my field, as we have a high standard for English. And this actually echoes what has been identified in earlier research, for example, in Renwick Cornell's research of criticizing that the global southern countries are becoming, particularly in social sciences, are becoming data banks for the global North researchers, who are taking charge of the conceptualization. In contrast, we see that in STEM areas, there is no such clear patterns of labor division. One participant shared that once an experimentalist have conducted a research experiment and had the research results, a theorist would work on explaining the mechanisms behind the results. Or a theorist made a hypothesis and then an experimentalist work on testing it in experiments. As far as I see in my field, perhaps half of Chinese researchers work on experiments and the other half work on theorization. So we don't see a clear division of labor. Next slide, please. In addition to the agency, the two types of agency that we have mentioned, there are also a series of structural factors that we identified that are conditioning researchers' exercise of agency. And these also correspond with the three categories of structural factors identified and proposed by Marginson and Xu in their comparative education review paper. Well, we identified that the identified factors mostly lied in the category of material and institutional factors, including the global research system, incentives and support from the government institution, research fund, the geopolitics, travel restrictions, and mailing delays, the share of intellectual property. There was only one factor in the category of ideational factors, that is the personalities, for example, emotional stability and working styles, including the speed of responding to emails of the potential collaborators, and one in the category of social relations factors, that is the existing global research networks and their previous international connections. Well, we would like to emphasize that the geopolitics, which was considered as a material and institutional factor here, rather than an ideational factor, because it was the material manifestations such as sanctions, less funding support, cancelling of joint fund, rather than the ideational ones such as ideological differences that influenced international research collaboration. And as many of these factors have been discussed in Yusuf's sharing, so I might skip it and perhaps we could have more discussion time left. Well, so in conclusion, we would like to highlight 5 major arguments developed from the 2 papers above. Well, first, it's necessary to go beyond the halo effect that not all institutions in the global North or West are good, and not all outside of this sphere is bad. We need more nuances in promotion rules and incentives. And secondly, for individual researchers, bringing international funding is good for career development, but the recognition of such funding may need to go beyond the existing global North and South inequalities for a more equal global research space. And third, positional good and epistemic injustice are not only enforced and promoted by those in the traditionally central global North or West systems, which benefit the most from the current inequalities. Those disadvantages positions are also playing their part in perpetuating the inequality in those global South and global Eastern system. Fourth, the agency of researchers in the global South and East is strong and constantly exercised. Individual researchers have the capacity to navigate the structural conditioning, make use of opportunities, and confront challenges in pursuing their personal objectives. And these could be invaluable sources for the challenging of the global inequalities and power imbalance in research. And finally, governments and institutions can support researchers' IRC and enhance their research capacity. There could be effective tools, including evaluation criteria, joint research funding schemes, and financial support for international traveling, visiting, and collaboration. But a prerequisite is that these governments and institutions need to change their mindset of the global hierarchy and confront the existing hierarchy and inequalities in the global space. Well, to end the presentation, we hope to make a final remark, that is, to attain a more equal global research system, we not only need actions from those in traditionally central global North, West countries, but also from those who are at a disadvantage, but still have the agency to make a difference in the globally unequal research system. Well, that's all from us, and we look forward to your questions and comments and the Q&A session. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Yes, thank you. I'm just stopping to share. So yeah, basically that's how we organized. First, we highlighted the structures, which the first paper highlighted more, and then Lili highlighted agential elaborations. We're happy to, get questions from your side.
Thank you so much, Yusuf and Lili, for this amazing presentations. It was just it was really mind-blowing. I have so many questions actually on my list to ask, but before I do ask my questions, I just want to open the floor for discussion. We have quite I think we have around 40 minutes for discussion. So since we're only 33 people, I would just encourage everyone, if you have any questions, just like to raise your hand or you unmute yourself and ask your question directly to our speakers. And so has anyone who wants to? Yeah, okay, Phil.
Can I think it's a bit of a methodological question. It's not particularly intellectual. It's quite surface level, really, and I'm not even sure how to frame it. But I need to ask Yusuf and Lili, because I'm not sure who else would ever be able to give me such a credible answer to this. And I think you alluded to it when you started, Yusuf, when you're talking about global South-South, global North-South, global South-North, and I suppose to a point East and West as well. How do you kind of conceptualize and operationalize what North and South and East and West are? And I'm sorry to ask, because I know it's probably very nuanced and probably quite debated and problematic, and I assume it shifts a lot, but is there a sort of methodological, I don't know, resource or somewhere that people can go?
Thank you very much. I can go ahead, but Lili also, whichever.
Go ahead, please.
Sorry?
Go ahead, please. I can add if necessary.
I mean, so these are, I agree. I mean, it's also hard to make, in this globally, nuanced world, it's hard to make such distinctions, but this is widely used in the literature as well. So global North is not necessarily a geographic term. It explains, how can I say? So there are different discussions of naming this. Some say, oh, let's use developed world. But then will you say the others are not developed? That's not a good term to use, some say. So these theories came from these discussions. Global North means, those in the usually Euro-American systems, basically. I think I agree that this term fits much easier when you're discussing, for example, Latin America, South America and North America, or, Europe and Africa. But globally, this was discussed for other regions as well, including Asia. But I think when the Asia, especially East Asia, comes into discussion, then, as we have used in the study, we started using global West and East as well, because there's that difference as well. So in the end, when we use, in UK, it's very popular to use just global North, but we specifically add global North/West, because when you look at from the East part of the world, right, it kind of, there's that distinction as well. And some of it is seen in a similar way, especially those who are recently developing their infrastructure and research systems. If Lili wants to add more, happy to, but no pressure.
Thank you. So I think it's Yusuf basically shared our consideration while we were thinking about whether which way we should go. I think while we are criticizing the global inequalities and hoping and calling for promotion of equalities in the global research space, but inevitably we have to confront these divisions and hierarchy. One way is to looking at from the global North and South, global East and West. Even though we know that the global space is dynamic, we have different countries moving from this category to the other category, and it's no longer, maybe it's no longer the best way to categorize is just to highlight the inequalities we have. And also, we also consider other approaches like the world system theory that highlighted center, semi-periphery, and the periphery systems. We were also critiquing that approach, but we would like to acknowledge that inequalities exist, and there is potential for the global North or global East and global South countries to challenge those inequalities. And this is more used as a compartment tool and also reflecting inequalities rather than trying to categorize countries into different categories in a neat way.
Thank you both. We have a question from Ibrar.
Hi everyone, can you hear me?
Yes.
Hi Lancaster, hi Yusuf, hi Lili. Thank you very much for this really interesting talk. I went out of the room because I had something to do at the point when you were talking about when you were introducing epistemic injustice. So I apologize if my question was answered in that slide, but I went out and I came back in because I had something to do. But throughout the talk, I didn't hear injustice. I heard epistemic imbalances, epistemic hierarchies of power, etc. But I didn't hear injustice being talked about the way Miranda Fricker talks about it. And I want to know how this has been used as a tool to think with, because it's a lot more complex than being undermined as a knower or being sort of marginalized as a knower. Injustice has to follow the person in every aspect of their life for it to be epistemic injustice. And many academics in the global South, if you want, I'm using your word term there, they are quite privileged in their societies. And it has to be extensive and enduring harm, at least that's my reading of it, for it to be true epistemic injustice and not just, something else. And you all used imbalance and hierarchy and agency, but you didn't use injustice. And I'm wondering if that's the right tool to think with here. Unrelatedly, the global North, global South thing. I mean, am I a global North academic? If I moved to Cape Town and got a job, would I be, which is a very reasonable thing to do, would I be a global South academic all of a sudden? Would I be on the other side of your research analysis? Or is it to do with what tools I'm using in my research, what epistemes I'm drawing from? Whether I'm in the North, South, the East, or the West, in which case most people tend to sing from the same epistemological hymn sheet, in which case it doesn't really make a difference. Have you thought about that? What's your sort of response to that, and how do you bring that into the research? Or maybe I'm misunderstanding it, in which case I apologize.
Lili, would you like to go ahead and then I can come in, or?
Sure. Thank you, Ibra. This is such an important and very important question. I agree, and perhaps I'm not sure because in the Turkish paper we use the epistemic injustice, but I don't think we are using it exactly in the way that we would invite those nuances and more that's part of the discussion. But I think Yusuf is also doing this. We are doing, this is beyond our presentation today, but we are doing relevant research as well, looking at epistemic injustice. For example, in my other research, I'm looking at what is regarded as knowledge and what is not, who has the power to decide what is knowledge, and particularly in relation to the Chinese knowledge, that to what extent Chinese knowledge has been excluded in research and in education system, and how we might incorporate those knowledge into the education system, and what inequalities might we have. And this is related not only with the structure system that we are seeing today, imbalance, hierarchy, and inequalities, but also the mindset. And I came across with one African philosopher's work, whose name is Hong Tongji, and he talked about this idea of intellectual extroversion, saying that our research mindset has been influenced, and to a large extent following the global northern countries or Euro-American researchers' theories, ideas, and the topics and the theories and the language discourse we use are extroverted into a large extent, so on and so forth. So these are all related and different manifestations of the injustice and also inequalities here. But I don't think we are really getting into the deep discussion of what injustice is in this particular research. But I think this question is very important. We might need to take into consideration in our future research. I'm not sure if Yusuf would agree with me.
No, 100%. I think these are important questions and maybe our next steps as well, because we just keep getting more detailed and detailed. We started with bibliometrics data to analyze these, and then now qualitative data started coming out. I think Ibrar's points are especially important. For example, epistemic injustice, if you want to delve more into this, we also maybe want to look at the epistemologies or theoretical frameworks for conceptual knowledges, produced indigenously in those locations, and whether these people, for example, just keep using those established epistemologies from the West, or they are using their own and developing their own. These are also important discussions that needs to be there, I think. Regarding the second part, I think he mentioned, I think these nuances, like moving from somewhere to another, I think those are always there, and they create additional nuances. But I think we have to acknowledge this. For example, let's say you're currently based in UK and you move to another country. Which one? Let's say some country in global south. You will be impacted by the institutional policies, your dean's decisions, and other things, or the country's national policies. Because, as your recruiter, or the ones who hold you in their department, right, they may say, we need to increase the collaborations with those established prestigious institutions in the global north. So what I'm saying is, in your case, maybe the individual scale will be more nuanced, but then the institutional scale will still be there, like the institutional parameters that are affecting you, and the national scale will still be there. For example, I was able to see the differences very strongly when I moved from UK to Hong Kong. I was in UK before. I mean, of course, Hong Kong is a very different, it's not like it's a economically very high, region here. But even here, the collaboration dynamics are very different from UK, or, where you publish journal articles, they become very different from that. The rankings of journals, they weren't much emphasized, that I know it's also getting more and more emphasized in UK, but those things change immediately. So whether you are, maybe you may be a academic from global south working in global north, or the opposite, the other dynamics are still there, I think, and they need to be acknowledged, so that maybe we can go into deeper, more detailed analyses in the future research. I hope that answers, but very insightful, and hope to keep getting more questions from you, because they always bring about good ideas.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Yusuf and Lili, for this very insightful response. We have a couple of questions on the chat. Jonathan asking about how you engage with hermeneutic and testimonial injustices as Fricker was kind of categorizing in your analysis.
Okay, hermeneutic and testimonial injustice. So yeah, these are the discussions Fricker goes into in detail. In our research, we didn't go into that much, we didn't go into subtopics and again did another thematic analysis in these. We focused on the general idea of epistemic injustice and how it comes up in international research collaborations. And international research collaborations, it's just the knower, the better knower and the better knowledge producer, the overall, they were just keep repeating that. Of course, they weren't saying, oh, they're better knowledge producers, but it was implicitly there all the time. And it was very interesting for us. By the way, so in the Turkish paper, I highlighted these inequalities more, but this doesn't mean the Turkish scholars don't have, agency. Basically, agency is there as well. It was just maybe the location between East and West or North or South. Turkey is there. We tend to have that identity crisis in ourselves as well. Are we Europeans or are we Asians? But that was more visible there, and we wanted to highlight it. But we didn't get into, more in the sub discussions of this theory.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Yusuf. Just before I move to the next question, maybe related to Fricker, I just want to, just say a couple of words, because this is something that I've been also working for a number of years now, epistemic injustice, but I'm of course purely talking from a feminist perspective, and there have been even discussions around feminist Fricker, not feminist Fricker, of course, and Fricker's approach from a more feminist, in feminist spaces, and there have been discussions around Fricker's ideas about whether, because the idea of epistemic injustice is just like something that has been long existing there, and it's been mostly actually meant, if you go to the Latin South American literature, like if you read Silvia Rivera Kusikanki, or if you read African feminists, and so on, you will just see that this idea of epistemic injustice were just sitting there for a long while. So there's also a discussion around whether actually it's a form of inequality, whether the global North scholars are just going there, taking these ideas and reterming and then reselling, and it becomes a branded thing that's just they are known for. So there's also a discussion around this, that this idea is was always there, but we now use it in relation to, Fricker's conceptualization of how she's taking it on. And there's also been quite, again, from a feminist perspective, critiques of Fricker as well, which may be, helpful to you, or which may not be, about how she was kind of whitewashing the feminist injustice term. So there is a paper by Hora Berenstein, which is quite recent, I would say, in 2020, that came up in Journal of Hypatia, just the Feminist Philosophy Journal. If you might not, I assume you might not follow that, but one of the critiques was just how Fricker was kind of failing to recognize the legacy of women of color, but in your case, maybe the women of color and people of color's epistemic resistance around the issues of inequalities that exist in their everyday life, and the use of single access conceptual resources to understand this kind of intersectional oppression. So it might be just, I can email you later on, but that's just when I start using the Fricker in my work, I always kind of think from that aspect as well. What are the critiques, and do they really explain the inequalities that we are speaking of? So this was just a comment that in relation to what Jonathan was asking.
I think I'd love to, I know you have done a lot of work on this, and you're really good at this. We would be happy to learn from you. Please do send those articles. I'll read them with pleasure, and use them in the upcoming works. Okay. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you. Just we have another question in the chat from Chao, who asks, he wants to know more about the insider and outside positions reflecting on the researcher's cultural or non-global North backgrounds relate with the research agenda, and topics like English and Anglophone affect in division of academic labor in humanities and social sciences ICR.
So I'm trying to
Maybe
understand
I
the...
could.
Oh yeah,
Yeah.
please. Okay.
Yes,
And
so I'm not sure what the question is exactly about in terms of the insider and outsider positions, because in our research we did find the disciplinary differences between humanities and social sciences, and we saw that humanities and social sciences, the inequalities, division of power is particularly evident. This is not reported in the research, but I personally also observed that for Chinese researchers, because this is a finding from the China case, for Chinese HSS researchers, I could see very different kinds of work they are published in English or in Chinese. So when they write in English and when they write in Chinese, topics will be different, the genre of writing different, which is reasonable because the way of writing could be different, but the kind of research they do is very different. And that could be related to the labor division, because to get published in the English journal, international journals, there were certain expectations, certain rules they need to follow. And then another critique is that the gatekeepers of those international journals are primarily based in the global north or Euro-American countries, and they have to follow certain theoretical ways of theorizing things. And based on our research, many of them felt that they were less capable in doing those conceptualization work, and they would like to rely on their international collaborators who are mostly based in the global, not global north or west or Euro-American countries. They are mostly based in those countries, and who are more familiar with the global English literature, know what kind of research are better welcome, more popular, and more expected and more welcome, and they are willing and they are open to collaborate with these researchers to get published in the global venues. And so another thing is that they are very different from the Chinese publications that I've observed. But I'm not sure if this is exactly related to the insider and outsider positions.
Yes.
Well,
Thank you.
Chao, yes, please.
Yes, thank you very much, Lili. It's really related to my question. Yes, I'm sorry, my question is not very clear. But we can, how I understand is that, you know, language demarcates the boundary of insider and outsider. But your comments really I mean, enlighten my query, that the research place of the research publication itself is demarcating global south and north and insider and outsider. Thank you so much, Lili. Thank you. Because I'm also working on such an issue, and so it helps me. Thank you.
Thank you. I think language is a part of that, but not so determining in terms of the division of power, labor, because many of the researchers have studied abroad and they are good at English. So I think it's more about the writing and ideas, conceptualization, than the language itself.
Yes, it is just, yes, thank you.
just to add a little on this, if I may. So Lili covered most of the topics already, but we also have, hopefully, we were developing a paper on the role of English in these international collaborations. We had a few questions on that as well in this case, and the use of language seems to be creating, you know, this linguistic imperialism. Our colleague is working on that. As actually, she's in one of the listeners. If she wants to come up, she can say more on this. She's welcome, but no pressure. I don't want to pressure her. English does have a role, but the role is, I think, as Lili highlighted, changes. And I think there may be more roles. It may be more influential in humanities and social sciences than STEM areas. STEM is, you know, more like less language and more like methods, but humanities and social sciences, there's so much things going on. And I remember from the paper that we're writing, for example, if you're Italian, there are different ways of writing the same thing, right? If you're English, different ways of writing the same thing, and they affect maybe your chances of, approval or not from the, journal and other things. Hopefully, we will work more on this and develop more ideas. And we will be happy to stay in touch with you, Chao, if you can email us later.
Yes, thank you. I will. Thank you, Yusuf.
Just to say that Chao is a postdoctoral researcher in our department, and he is also working on similar issues about Burmese staff, international staff, and students who migrate around abroad, and trying to understand how they build that relations of belonging and identity, and these epistemic issues. So I think there's a lot of common things that you can explore there. So just moving to the next question on the chat. Well, Cassie has a question, and she says that you mentioned that STEM researchers seem to take on more theorization work than their HSS counterparts, and she wonders why this is the case, and if you have some idea about the mechanisms behind, and whether the current advocacy for autonomous HSS discourse system in China changed the dynamics.
Well, thank you, Casey, for the very interesting question. And I think I don't have a clear answer here, but my hunch is that for STEM areas, these researchers that we interviewed, they didn't see that there are different kinds of knowledge systems. They were viewing there is a universal knowledge system that everybody studies the same thing. For example, in physics, in mathematics, they are even though they are maybe they may study using different languages, but then they are studying the same thing, and they didn't question or feel lack of confidence about their capacity of theorization. Instead, they are very confident, and they see what kind of theorizational work they could do in collaboration, and they have achieved much. So in that sense, STEM researchers, they are more confident and more they didn't really question themselves. And it was mostly based on their expertise, whether they are better at experiments or theorization. Whereas for HSS scholars, there is a sort of a way, there is an expectation that when they publish in English, they might need to follow the English ways of writing and knowledge, which can be different from the Chinese way. That I think that is one reason why the Chinese government, and also this is not only top down. I have to say it's also bottom up way of looking that in China that HSS scholars are hoping to incorporate the local cultures and traditions into their knowledge system, because they have been critiquing that the knowledge system in the country has long been imported from the West and lack of indigenization. So they're hoping to do that and develop this autonomous discourse system. But this is still in the rather early stage of the efforts, even though the efforts have been there for more than 100 and 200 years. But then these kind of efforts in the modern time, I mean, the autonomous discourse system is relatively early, and there might be a lot of more work needs to be done in terms of what kind of knowledge is and how we treat traditional cultures and traditional knowledges and so on and so forth.
Right. Thank you so much. We do have another question from Noni Dube. Noni, that was a rather long question. Would you like to unmute yourself and ask directly to our speakers?
Okay, that's all right. Thanks a lot. Thank you. I really enjoyed this. And my question relates more to whether there are some positive things coming out of this that are obscured by the lenses that you've chosen to look at the problem, right? So, for example, one of the things that you're saying is that at the moment, it looks like, at least in social sciences, the collaboration is such that the Southerners are doing the data gathering, and then the Northerners are doing the framing and conceptualization leading to the publication. So if, as you say, the interest is for people to also collaborate and learn, do we not see this as a starting point for also shifting the power dynamics, right? Because if for example, I will be a Southern researcher and I develop the skills in framing and conceptualization, then in future publications, I become more independent. But I need a starting point for me to be able to develop those capabilities. So what might look like imperialism, I don't know what the terms I used, might actually be the start of something that levels the playing field. And then there's also the reality. So the second part of it, you know, whoever puts money into research is going to get better research. And I think we see this with the China example. I know you didn't get into Ghana, but you will probably know this. There's virtually no investment in these countries in terms of research. And so if researchers are sitting in these contexts, then it's quite difficult for them to have control over what is important and what gets researched. They're going to have to lean towards what they can get funding for or what collaborations could come out of this. But still, so actually it's three things. Sorry, now I see why it's confusing. Then the other thing is that also if we see these things, so another way to look at it is that, okay, the powerful ones determine the agenda, but there could also be another way of looking at it, which is to say, if over time we can actually harmonize our systems of knowledge generation, then we can have these similar disciplines across contexts speaking to each other more, right? And that cannot necessarily be a bad thing, because we can actually get richer theories or new theories that are going to allow us to look at those things across contexts, and the theories or concepts that are not speaking to each other right now probably start to speak to each other as a result of that. So I suppose my overall question is, are there some positive things we can take out of this that might have been missed as a result of the lenses that you have used to look at the problem?
Happy to go before or after you, Lili.
After you, Yusuf.
Okay. I think that's a very good question. And I think it's always good to finish or, you know, explain the good note, positive things coming out of research. And I don't think our research is drawing a very negative picture. Why? Because I think we specifically what we want to highlight is agency, basically. If there's agency, if, you know, those who are in disadvantage can use their agency and, you know, use it at different levels, you know, that individual level. In our other publications, we created tables on this, like agency at individual can mean this, agency at the institutional level can mean this, agency at national level, because these are all actors. I mean, and actor means someone with agency, can be weaker or stronger, but, you know, what we are arguing for is to have agency around the world, and not ascribing agency to certain regions or certain epistemic perspectives, let's say. So if we can use our agency more and work towards still and develop collaborations, I think collaborations by nature is a good thing. It's not a bad thing, because I think the more connected we are, the more we work together, it creates new knowledges. It creates, you know, new solutions to the problems we have, especially in research. So we should work towards collaborating more and doing more, but we also take care of the nature of this collaboration. For example, let's give an example to an agency. If I was to be a dean, and if I see some of my young, you know, researchers in the faculty, I see that, you know, they're collaborating in these nice international research, but they're almost not being used, just data collectors, data couriers. I would, you know, just tell them, hey, you know, collaboration is good, but make sure you're not used. Make sure this is a, you know, more equal terms. So, you know, everything goes in nicely. And same with, you know, this happens in, I think, gender-related issues as well. I know Melis does a lot of work on this. We didn't do on this, but I mean, when I was reading these collaboration papers, there are papers who say, you know, in the team, there are, you know, there's a lady, they want to include her because they want to look nice, right? But, and then the paper is written and then they say, okay, we wrote the paper and then you're a co-author. But the lady was like, why, you know, she didn't put an input. So these things happen a lot. And this is power imbalances are everywhere. So the good thing, what we can
Sorry.
do.
Sorry, so I think here you're preaching to the pulpit. I understand the dynamics of what you are presenting, and I appreciate that you look at agency, but I think when it comes to the good that can come out of this, at least in as far as this particular presentation is concerned, I have not found a lot of tangible things that you can show are good that are coming out of these collaborations using that agency framework. And maybe my comment then is that you can highlight this more, because now it just sounds like use your agency. Okay, but to what end? So what good things can you evidence that are coming out of this? And at what end of this change are those things lying? Right? Like I said, maybe as an example, that the division of labor right now, it appears as though the people in the north actually get all the glory, is the start of something that could be wonderful later, or some of it already inherently, based on what you will do in the beginning, will already lead to immediate benefits. So that's something that I can leave you with, because all the things you say, I know I cannot disagree with, but I'm still looking for the light in it, and I didn't quite see it in the presentation.
Well, that's an
Thank
interesting.
you.
Thank
Yeah,
you.
Lili.
Yeah, that's an interesting comment. Perhaps what we can share more about is the China case. So China's development of its research system has been benefiting so much from international collaboration. Perhaps this is a really good positive end of having good international collaboration and agency. Looking at the development process of China, that it really started the research system series from the 1990s, and now it's regarded as a powerhouse today. And if we look at the statistics, that international collaboration has always been an important part of the international outputs. And collaboration is always in the top priorities of the national, international, national, institutional, and individual agenda. And for these researchers, for humanities and social sciences researchers, even though we identified these inequalities of the labor division in humanities and social sciences, but at least, for example, in STEM areas, there were more equal division of labor, and the system, which was less developed many years ago, has benefited much from it, with, of course, with various support and massive support from different players. And also for humanities and social science, as you were mentioning, I think it's a good point. Perhaps this is a process. At this stage, it's more of working with others, getting to know better about the system, what is expected, and later on, with their reflective agency, they start to challenge and take more independent, have more independent power to lead the research, rather than only become a data bank, but also take on more responsibility of the conceptualization and framing of the research. Maybe I'm still positive about this. Maybe it takes time, but I'm positive to see what it unfolds, how it unfolds.
Thank you so much, Lili and all. Yusuf, I know that we're just coming to end of our session and you've been very tired. I just want to add something that what Noni has saying. It's just more like a comment, actually. Well, Noni, I heard your comment that you're saying, what good is coming out of these collaborations, international collaborations, which is something that really important we need to highlight. But then and we need to question if there's so much exploitation and inequalities going on in these collaborations. Can we talk of anything that's good coming out? Like, can you call something public good when you have exploited and so much people to the extent that,
well, but
I know
we
it
are
takes
also
another discussion.
researchers. The nuance is important, right? And I think it should show up in our writings, because when we shine too much spotlight on one thing, I mean, this is how we end up with disinformation and polarization. Because yes, while there is a need to acknowledge the exploitation that goes on, you can still, in the same breath, nuance this a bit more by highlighting the positive things that are coming out of it. And actually, if you will do that, especially within a single piece of work, you are able to say positively, here are things we could do differently, so that this other bit that isn't working so well actually also gets addressed in the long term. So I will just say, for me, it's about nuance. Again, I know these things. I'm a global southerner, so you'd be preaching to the pulpit. And I do not discredit at all any of the things you point out with regards to exploitation, but that's an incomplete picture. And I think it can be more positive if it becomes more complete. Then we can do a bit more, and then we can have an audience that is more willing to listen.
Yeah, thank you. No, I hear you. I mean, like it can have positive aspect, but it's also about an like ethical sense of where we stand and so on. So it's just like
definitely it doesn't have to be one thing or the other.
No,
Those
it doesn't have to be one or the other. No,
so,
no.
Yeah.
But it's also an ethical approach that we take, like to audience that we write and what we want to, because it can easily take us to other things about colonialism, where all these people talk about, benefits of, they talk about, oh yeah, we need colonialism, but this is what happened out of colonialism.
Maybe we need another conversation for another day, because I think we're speaking on different planes and we will not be able to conclude this by 2 o'clock. Yeah. Just
to give different perspectives. So thank you so much, Yusuf and Lili. It was wonderful to host you, and this was a really a very interactive conversation. And I know that you're now pretty tired because of all these conversations that was going on and the questions. So before we leave, I just want to remind you our next webinar, which will be on Wednesday, 22nd of November, and will be presented by Naomi Hodson from Hill University. So we look forward to seeing you next week. And thank you so much for coming this session. And again, huge thanks to our speakers.
Yeah, thank you very much all. I enjoyed it.
Thank you all. Thank you very much.